What is up, Pitt fans? Welcome to another edition of the PG Pitt Show brought to you by FanDuel. My name is Stephen Thompson. That's Abby Schnable. We both cover Pitt athletics for the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, and we are taking a little bit of a football angle as the transfer portal wraps up. It closed to new entries on Friday. It still means Pitt can recruit some players out of the portal, which, as Abby and I are going to talk about in a minute, they will need to do. There are a couple of positions and needs that they still need to hit, but Panthers actually hit on one of those positions of need and added another piece to another position of need, you could say, maybe creating a competition there. So we're going to introduce the new guys to lead off this episode. The first one, the most notable one, is the addition of Texas State transfer quarterback Holden Geriner, a former four-star recruit, started his career at Auburn. Not a ton of game action, but Abby, it looks like the Panthers, after announcing that Mason Heinschel would stay at Pitt for another year, they have their backup quarterback in place, it seems.
Yeah, I mean, 21 total passes in his career, not great, but I do want to point out, he originally started at Auburn, was there for 3 seasons, and ended up at Texas State this past year where he was playing backup. And I think that experience that you get, whether it's spring ball, summer ball, even during the fall, you're getting good experience against those guys. I mean, coaches make a point to make sure the twos are going up against the ones and the ones going up against the twos. And so this is a guy who may not have seen the field during a game a lot, but this is a guy who also has the potential to be really good. We just don't know what we're actually getting because we haven't seen him in game. But I mean, I think back to last spring and we were watching Mason Heinschel throw dimes left and right, and maybe this guy can throw dimes, and we just don't know. I am excited for, like a potential number 2 position battle with these 2 true freshmen and Corey Daly and Angela Arenda. I think both of them have high upsides. And when you add in someone who has been a little bit more experienced, I think that's experience in the sense of, playing in high caliber practices. I think that's going to help not only Corey Daly and Angela Arenda, but Mason Heinschel too. Like, I think that the experience, the maybe not experience, but the veteran presence that that Holden Geriner adds, I think could be very beneficial since you have such a young quarterback group.
Yeah, absolutely. Holstein and Cole Gonzalez, I think Mason Heinschel and Cade Bell lose some sounding boards, quite honestly. I don't think the most important thing that Gariner is going to do at Pitt is, playing games. Lord willing, he's not thrust into that. But I think that if Pitt has to roll with someone as a backup, as a second option, even if Gariner is maybe the number 2 on the depth chart, I would have to assume that they would want one of these true freshmen to maybe step into that role as long as they're ready. So I think you're right. There is going to be an interesting kind of position battle there. But I'm also interested to hear about what kind of the meeting room is like and what the position group is like after Eli Holstein and Cole Gonzalez move on. And you've got some new faces in there, some young faces in there. How does Gariner kind of help move the room along and help guys mature? And, how is he kind of off the field as a resource for all of those young quarterbacks that Pitt has? That's probably going to be his most important job. As soon as he gets to campus, it'll be learning the playbook, trying to understand all the concepts that Cade Bell wants. And, then again, just being kind of a supporting voice and in a supporting role for Mason Heinschel will be really important. I think it's tough to recruit a backup out of the trenches. You looked at Pitt's quarterback room and they definitely needed someone older, someone with some college, some kind of college experience. But it's tough to get an older guy to transfer to a place like Pitt where you have really no path to starting barring an injury. You look at Gariner's resume and it's pretty bare, but I think that's just kind of what you have to work with if you are a college football coach right now who's looking for a backup quarterback. You're really not going to get anyone stellar out of the transfer portal, because anyone who with a kind of proven track record is going to go somewhere where they have a chance to compete for a starting job. Speaking of competing for, unless you had something else you wanted to add.
I was just going to say, I think about the fact that Cole Gonzalez, they only got him as a backup because he ended up leaving Alabama. And that's the only reason they really, truly had that experienced backup. And we still barely saw him last season. And so I don't think, like you said, it's just difficult to recruit a backup when you're probably not competing for a starting spot. But who knows? Because, I mean, Eli Holstein lost his starter spot last year. So it's always interesting to see what happens.
Absolutely. But speaking of position battles, Pitt seems to have another one brewing on special teams as well. They added 2 kickers out of the transfer portal. You got Sam Hunsaker from Northern Arizona, but last week, they added Antonio Chadha from Western Illinois. Made 13 of 19 field goals last year, 58 kickoffs, 36 for touchbacks. I can't say this looks like an especially sterling resume. It seems like he has a stronger arm or a stronger leg, than Hunsaker might. Longest kick from 53 yards out. Hunsaker not exactly a long distance specialist, but the Panthers have a special teams battle now. You're searching for a successor to Trey Bukowski, transferred to Michigan, and it seems like one of these guys is going to have to emerge from really out of nowhere, and not out of nowhere, but the Panthers are bringing in 2 experienced guys from lower levels to try and hack it at the ACC level.
What I do like about Antonio Chadha, because we talked about this with Samuel Hunsaker, is he played in a dome for most of his career. That is not the case for Antonio Chadha. Western Illinois plays in an open field in the middle of Illinois, and that is beneficial when you think about terms of environment, because Illinois gets cold in the later months, but they also know how to play hot. I'm not going to say Western Illinois brings you a lot of wind like you get at Acrisure Stadium, but it is a potential benefit for him going into this battle, because if he can just be a little bit more consistent because he has the experience in an open field, that might be the feather in his cap. Even if you look at like Samuel Hunsaker's experience, I mean, neither of them jump off the page. They're fairly even in stats for the most part. There are a couple differences, and I think maybe on paper Hunsaker edges him out when you're just looking at the numbers, but numbers don't tell the whole story. I mean, we saw that in the kicker battle last year that we didn't even realize was a battle until all of a sudden, Pat Narduzzi drops that Trey Bukowski was starting. And so I think both of these guys have the potential to step up. And I'm like you said, it's just an intriguing battle when you're bringing in 2 new guys for a spot like this.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Like you said, right at this point, I would expect that Chadha maybe has an edge because of his, ability to work through the elements. That's just something that you're not really, I think, going to get a good grip on, like, either guy's strengths, in adverse conditions until you actually see them on the field and in games, and the weather actually does turn poorly, which, you can maybe do a little bit of that in spring ball, but I don't think there's a lot that can mimic what you're going to face on a blustery November afternoon at Acrisure Stadium. That's just a different environment. So it'll be really one of the more interesting, I think, position battles that Pitt has in spring ball, and we'll see what they're able to do in fall camp as well. But that's one to definitely keep an eye on, because Pitt has had strong kickers going back. I mean, I can't remember the last time Pitt had. I mean, you have to go back to before Chris Blewett, probably. Way back at the start of Pat Narduzzi's tenure. He's had a pretty good eye as a head coach for and his coaching staff as well has had a good eye for kickers in the past. So you got to hope that they can hit on one this time as well to help replace Trey Bukowski. So Abby, it seems like a couple of positions need filled out, but the Panthers still have some work to do in the transfer portal before they round out this transfer class, which does seem like it is filling up pretty quickly. I believe they're at 17 commitments now, if I am counting correctly, but still some work to do. We talked about the wide receivers last week. They seems like they definitely do need some more help there, barring someone from this freshman class stepping up or someone on the roster already stepping up. But I think one of the positions where they really do have to to find an addition and a veteran addition before they start spring practices is at safety, because it seems like there is a big hole there with Kavir Baines and Javon McIntyre exiting the program, and so far they've gotten a couple of corners, but no safeties yet.
Yeah, I mean, you return Chris Brookins, which I think is huge. I mean, me and you talked about all season that he was one of, if not the best in the backfield last season. He was consistent, but there's a pretty steep drop off behind him when you consider really it's just Josh Geriner. And I think Josh Geriner really took advantage of some of his opportunities. I mean, that blocked punt from earlier in the season still like lives in my head. But he's still pretty unproven. And then any freshman that could play the position, they add depth but not certainty, especially at a position like safety. And so really getting someone who just maybe has experience, it doesn't need to be FBS level experience. I mean, we saw it with Kavir Baines Marquez. You know, there are guys out there that are ready to come in, be hungry, and you know, compete for a starting spot, because I think Kavir Baines Marquez might be one of the most impactful transfers Pitt had last year. And so if they're able to find someone that can come in, you know, support Chris Brookins, compete for a starter spot alongside Josh Geriner, I think it's necessary at this point, especially when you consider there's just not a lot of depth there. And we saw guys get injured in the backfield and miss a few games.
Yeah, I completely agree with you that they don't need to go pull Caleb Downs out of the NFL draft or anything like that. Like they can get a really good safety from the FBS or FCS or from the FCS level or a lower level. They've proven that they've been able to do that. They've had a couple of good, FCS defenders come up and really been key pieces of the defense over the past couple of years. I think about Tyler Wiltz at linebacker too from a couple of years ago. He was a good player for his role. So safety, and you're spot on that the depth is really what's concerning here. I think that's the other reason why you don't necessarily need a superstar. You can have a comfortable rotation of Josh Geriner, Chris Brookins, and then one kind of veteran guy, maybe a graduate transfer from the FCS level. So yeah, you just need someone smart who's going to be able to pick up the defense fast and is a sure tackler. I think that's really the most that you need. I'm interested to see what Josh Geriner is able to do this spring. Because, if he kind of comes onto the scene, and maybe that's one of the reasons why Pitt is slow playing safety a little bit. Maybe they've seen some stuff from Josh Geriner that makes them think, yeah, we're mostly set here. We can count on Josh to contribute some really positive snaps for us, productive snaps for us. But until I see it, I'm going to assume that they need some support there as well. Anywhere else that you think the Panthers should pick up some help from the transfer portal before it ends?
Well, going back to Josh Geriner for a second, I just wanted to point out that, I mean, last year at the running back position, when it was so thin, that's really where, in the spring, that's really where we saw Joels Goff and Jakirian Turner, take leaps and bounds because there was no one else. And I think that's a great opportunity for Josh Geriner to do something similar with, just the lack of bodies that they have currently. I mean, I guess you still technically could add someone, but the likelihood of someone getting in for the spring semester is pretty low. But moving on to your question, So other than wide receiver and safety, I don't think there's another position where they need someone, but I do think that the offensive line has a lot of nuance in it, and I don't think it would hurt to get another offensive lineman. I mean, you return Kendall Stanley, Ryan Coretta, Lyndon Cooper, Ryan Baer, and then Keith Gueva too. So that's a really solid lineup. But we've seen time and time again, especially these last 2 years, that one injury can really force Pitt back into the same shuffling that hurt them in those 2 years. And I don't think it was as big of an issue this year as it was in 2024, but they just need more bodies, and they need more bodies that are able to step in and contribute and not make silly penalties right away. And I think continuity helps, but this performance still needs to improve. I think getting someone out of the portal that is going to light a fire under some of these returners and really make them step up to the level that they need to be to protect Mason Heinschel this season to do some run blocking. I think that would be huge if they can get something. Now, I don't know how much it is of a bargaining chip to say, hey, you can come compete for a starting spot, as opposed to like, hey, we have this starting spot for you. But I just think having someone come in and just add some competition, add some depth could be really big, especially when you consider some of the guys that they've lost.
Yeah, you mentioned all of the guys that they have returning. I'm kind of operating under the assumption that they know who their starting lineup is going to be next year. Like I think it'll be Olivieri, the transfer from Penn at left tackle. You'll probably put one of Keith Gueva I believe it was Keith Gueva who was working on the left side
Mm-hmm.
last year before he went down with his injury at guard. So I would assume you slot him back in there. Ryan Corretta's at center. He's your replacement for Lyndon Cooper. Then you have B.J. Williams and Ryan Baer right there. You're right. You're absolutely right. They do need some improvement from those positions, from those guys, from those returners. But it absolutely will never hurt this team to add some starting quality depth there. They were able to, with Kendall Stanley last year, bring him in, say, hey, you can compete, but we can't guarantee you a spot. Kind of had some varying success with Kendall Stanley, and he's a younger guy too, so it's not impossible to recruit guys to come be backups and come compete for spots. But I agree with you. You are at this point, I think, probably not going to be able to pull a starter, a true bona fide starter from the portal right now. But if you can get quality backups, if you can get some quality depth and just add some insurance, that is something that they're never going to turn down. And like we said about safety. I mean, safety and kicker, honestly, like you never know what's going to happen when guys hit the field. Like who knows? They could. I wasn't super impressed with Keelan Adams. I don't think his resume was as sterling as maybe you would hope another transfer portal offensive lineman pickup would be. But who knows? If he could hit the floor or hit the field for spring ball and prove me completely wrong and really show some really impressive stuff. So long way to go. But I do think that Pitt needs to continue to add to the offensive line. And that's got to be paired with some development on the personnel side of things. You need the players that you do have to get better as well, because it wasn't just, like you said, I mean, it wasn't really depth that was an issue for Pitt last year. It was, the play of your starters, right? Like that was what held them back more often than not, especially in the biggest games. So those guys have to be able to step up, and that's going to be a key to Pitt leveling up, is if they are able to get some better play out of their offensive line. I think the only other position where I see they could use some help is really at defensive end, I think. Given some of the losses on the defensive line on the interior, and I know they picked up a couple of defensive tackles as well, but I'm not sure what they're going to do with Isaiah Neal yet. And whether he's a defensive end or a defensive tackle full time or swings between them, still think they could use some help at defensive end. And that's a position where I do actually have faith that there are enough edge rushers out there that you can find a starting quality guy. We'll see what Jaden Moore is able to do. Can he get a full offseason of work in? Can he, maybe emerge and become the guy that the Pitt coaches had really raved about? What does Jimmy Scott look like next year? I thought last year was kind of a disappointing year. Kind of by his standards, I really expected a big leap forward. Maybe I had my expectations a little bit too high, but I think you really need a lot more from Jimmy Scott. And then, of course, there's the Isaiah Neal question. So I think defensive end, that's one position where I think you could use one or two more guys there, because I also don't think the young depth behind them, I don't see many guys who are ready to make a leap up into a full-time contributing role just yet.
Yeah, it's much like the offensive line. It's not necessarily that you need someone to come in right away to bail out the guys that are there, but it's more of a depth situation, especially when you consider, that position was plagued with injuries all season between Blaine Spires and Jaden Moore. I'm optimistic that Jaden Moore can make a decent recovery and, get to that level that the coaches were constantly talking about. But one of the biggest things that I learned last season is defensive line depth is so important. And so just getting a few more bodies, whether they're starter quality or just, let's give Jimmy Scott 5 minutes to breathe, I think that's going to be beneficial. Breathe without a drop in quality too. I think that's what you're trying to look for at this point, is much like we saw the shuffling of the defensive tackles with Nick James, Sean Fitzsimmons, Francis Brew, and Isaiah Neal before he was moved over. You want that kind of vibe with the defensive ends, and you've lost Blaine Spires, you lost Joey Zielinski, and so it's just, you just want more people. You want more people in there to be able to go in and to be able to step up if someone needs a breather, if someone takes a huge hit. Again, I don't necessarily think you need the top person in the defensive end list that is still left in the portal, but someone, that is able to come in, compete, and be part of that regular rotation, I think could be, key for this defensive end group.
Yeah, it's a little like wide receiver where I feel like Pitt plays, 6 guys. They would play 6 guys if they could. They rotate a ton at defensive end. So you're spot on. I think, bodies are going to be really important for them as they get into spring ball and certainly get into the regular season. So defensive end, that's a position to watch for the Panthers as they continue to work through the transfer portal and round out this 2026 transfer class, Abby, that's all the Pitt football news that we have, but there's a big game tonight. Indiana, Miami down at Hard Rock Stadium in Miami, Florida. The Hoosiers, pretty heavy favorites. We're going to make some game picks here. According to our friends at FanDuel, Indiana, 7.5-point favorites over the Hurricanes. Abby, are you expecting Indiana to roll as much as our friends out in the desert are expecting us to?
Miami might have the home field, I say in quotes, advantage. But yeah, I don't see a world in which Indiana doesn't win this game. We've seen Miami drop some games that they probably shouldn't have this season. And Indiana's still undefeated. They've just completely rolled over some really solid teams. I mean, I think of Oregon, but at the beginning of the season and then again recently. And I just don't see a world in which Indiana isn't, covering that 7.5 points and isn't winning, especially just because I feel like Miami's been, good, but also inconsistent at times. And I don't think you can say the same about the Hoosiers.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Miami's just going to take too long to get going offensively in this game. I think they'll eventually break through, but Miami's biggest advantage in their playoff wins has been their ability to run the football. And I don't know. I've watched this Indiana team throughout the playoffs, and I just have a hard time believing that Indiana is going to get run over in the same way that some of these other teams did. I just think they're so deep and they are so talented up front that they are going to be able to meet the moment in the way that some of Miami's other opponents haven't been able to. I can see a world where Miami's defense keeps them in this game longer and helps them cover that more than a touchdown spread. But I just don't think it's likely. I really like everything that Indiana does, especially defensively, and Fernando Mendoza and Elijah Surratt and the duo of running backs they have. I have a hard time seeing Indiana losing this game and not covering, honestly. How about the point total? FanDuel, our friends at FanDuel tell us 47.5 points. Do you think this game goes over or stays under?
I'm going to take the over. I think Indiana is going to have a really, maybe not easy, but they're going to do a good job of slowing down the Hurricanes. And I think the Hoosiers are just going to kind of take over. I could see themselves scoring that many points. And so you add in maybe a touchdown or a field goal here or there, probably more than that. But, Miami is probably going to find the end zone at least a few times, or at least once, you would think at least. And so I don't see how this goes under unless Miami's defense has taken like 7,000 steps forward in the past week.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think Indiana, it's more likely that Indiana gets this over by themselves than this game stays under, honestly. I think Indiana is going to be able to put up some points. Like I said, like Miami's defense could keep them in this, but I think only for so long, just because the offense isn't going to be able to stay on the field. I am picking the over as well. So we are anti-ACC on the record for this national championship game. That's all we've got for this video. Thanks to everyone for tuning in. We'll have plenty more coverage this week. I'll be out in Boston watching Pitt basketball take on BC Tuesday night. Wednesday night, excuse me. I should make sure I know when the game is. So make sure that you are subscribed to the channel, PG Pitt on YouTube. Like this video so you're not missing a thing, and then follow all of our written work at post-gazette.com. Plenty more to come this week, and we will see you all next time. Bye.
Thank you for checking out this content from Post-Gazette Sports. If you watch this video on YouTube, please like the video and subscribe to our channel. For all of the sports coverage the Post-Gazette has to offer, visit post-gazette.com.